Super Mario Bros. Is, well, do I even need to tell you at this point? Super Mario Bros. Is one of the most iconic and important video games ever made. Released in 1985 for the Family Computer, or Famicom, in Japan, and the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, internationally, it was a key part in helping Nintendo resurrect the gaming industry after the video game crash of 1983. It pioneered 2D platforming and action games. But you might wonder, how did they make this game? They didn't have much of a blueprint back then. Well, I am going to look at different Nintendo interviews in order to find out just how Super Mario Bros. Was developed into the 2D platforming juggernaut that it is now. The conception of Super Mario Bros. Started in 1984. The idea was presented by Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of Mario, who at a meeting proposed making a game in which a large character moved around in a world with beautiful graphics. Initially, development started with a single square. This square was used to test how Shigeru Miyamoto and the other designers wanted the characters to move. However, Takashi Tezuka, a producer at Nintendo EAD and a designer for Super Mario Bros., asked the head of the sales division for the sales figures and saw that Mario Bros. For the Famicom was still selling well despite releasing the previous year. He brought this up to Miyamoto, and thus it was decided that Mario would be a great protagonist for the title. In December of 1984, Miyamoto asked programmers at SRD, Systems Research and Development, a partner company to Nintendo that has since been bought by them, to make a test version of the game in which a larger version of Mario, based off the version from Mario Bros., would jump in the air. He could also repeatedly jump in midair if the jump button was continuously pressed, akin to the water levels in the final game. The test was considered a success. It was decided that the game should have scrolling levels, as on the Famicom, shooters were mainly the only games that had scrolling gameplay, while other games stuck to one screen. Interestingly, Donkey Kong was originally intended to have scrolling, but the limitations of the circuit board would not allow for it, leading to the team creating separate screens instead. Due to the scrolling, the co-op multiplayer for Mario Bros. Had to be axed due to technical limitations. Another deviation from the norm was decided upon after this. But Miyamoto wanted the sky to be blue, which might seem obvious now, but back then, most games had black skies because developers felt it would make it easier to see the environment. So the blue sky was a huge graphical step forward. In February of 1985, the design specifications for Super Mario Bros. Were written. The button layout was written up and it was notably different to what is seen in the final game. The document shows that jumping was mapped to up on the D-pad rather than A, and A was used for attacking. The text below specifies that attacking would kick when empty-handed, or let Mario use a beam gun or a rifle, which is definitely not in the final game. Miyamoto specified that he wanted the gameplay to be split between the ground and sky. The beam gun was planned to be used in the sky stages while Mario rode on a rocket. Notably, Miyamoto stated that at one point, he thought it would be unusual to have floating blocks as he previously would mainly have objects in the environments have some kind of support, like a pillar for example, but eventually decided that they were fine to use and the game was designed around them. Later specifications changed the rocket to a cloud, and instead of a beam gun, Mario could use coins as projectiles, an idea suggested by the president of SRD and an important designer on Super Mario Bros., Toshihiko Nakago. This idea was ultimately turned down by Miyamoto due to it being impossible to implement due to technical limitations at the time. They also had ideas for Mario to jump across clouds, an inspiration taken from the Chinese mythological character Sun Wukong, a monkey king who had incredible supernatural powers, such as being able to jump very far, as described in the Chinese novel Journey to the West. Super Mario Bros. Was meant to be a culmination of the previous big titles in the franchise, as well as bringing in the advancements from other Famicom games. Larger character sprites were previously done in the Japan-only Devil World, and scrolling was at least partially done in Excitebike. Excitebike also inspired the Warp Zones with its system of allowing the player to choose which level to play first. The swimming physics were based off advice from Satoru Iwata, a man who was a programmer for the company HAL Laboratory at the time, before eventually becoming the president of Nintendo until his passing in 2015. Nakago asked Iwata how he had made the flight physics so smooth in the Famicom version of Balloon Fight compared to the arcade version. Iwata explained how instead of just using integers, he had used decimals to make the flying movements more precise. There were also notes in the specifications about adding, quote, refinements focusing on Donkey Kong's slopes, lifts, conveyor belts, and ladders, Donkey Kong Jr.'s ropes, logs, and springs, and Mario Bros. Enemy attacks, enemy movement, frozen platforms, and POW blocks, end quote. Many of these mechanics were implemented in some form, such as lifts from Donkey Kong, and the springs and vines from Donkey Kong Jr. However, some of them, like slopes and the POW block, were scrapped for this title. Creating the visuals for the game was not as simple as making various sprites and placing them in the game. The game's memory was limited to 256 kilobits. For perspective, that is about 0.002 gigabytes. Needless to say, the limitations were strict and the team had to work around them. They often had to reuse assets in order to fit within memory limitations. The castles from the beginning of each level were also used at the end of each world. The clouds and bushes used identical sprites just with the palette swapped. Even Luigi was just a palette swap of Mario. The music was composed by the now legendary Koji Kondo. He started at Nintendo by using the Famicom Family Basic programming accessory to arrange the theme songs for the anime Saze-san and Doraemon. As well as songs by the Japanese musician Saiko Matsuda within the program. His first Nintendo game that he composed for was Devil World. Miyamoto chose Kondo to work on Super Mario Bros. Due to liking his work on the aforementioned Devil World, specifically stating that he enjoyed the bonus level theme. Kondo had a fairly easy time coming up with his first theme for Super Mario Bros., the underwater theme, feeling that a waltz would fit well. However, he really struggled with the iconic Super Mario Bros. Theme itself. The music specifications, in addition to calling for bubbly sounds when underwater and a dark sound underground, stated that the overworld music should sound like, and I quote, above ground, western sounding, percussion and sound like a whip, end quote, a description which was very different to how the final song sounded. Kondo initially tried a relaxing tune to match the blue skies and bushes, but people said it didn't fit the speed of the gameplay. He tried adding a swing feel to it, but it was told it sounded odd, so that was scrapped as well. After getting to properly play the prototype for Super Mario Bros., he thought of what he described as a cha-cha-cha melody, which would eventually become the main Super Mario Bros. Theme. Kondo also created the sound effects, which he would have to reuse multiple times in order to save space, such as the sound of Mario entering a warp pipe and getting hit being the same, and the sound of a Koopa Troopa and swimming being identical. The gameplay of Super Mario Bros. Was very revolutionary for its time. As such, designing it required lots of trial and error. Tezuka and Miyamoto had to put themselves in the perspective of the players when designing levels, fine-tuning the level design so that players wouldn't suffer unfair deaths from poorly placed obstacles. The levels were drawn on a grid and had to be carefully designed because they could only see the level in action in-game once a day due to technical limitations at the time. As previously mentioned, the game was meant to have Mario explore the ground, sea, and sky. The sky sections were almost cut altogether due to technical limitations. However, Tezuka was inspired by the classic Jack and the Beanstalk story and created the idea for the vines that would reach up to the sky, with Miyamoto being the one to suggest them sprouting from blocks. To get Mario back down, they placed coins in mid-air to encourage the player to jump towards them, thus falling back down towards the ground sections. Originally, there was only a large form for Mario. However, when talking about ways to let the player see farther ahead, they realized that to do so, they might have to make Mario smaller. Then, Nakago said how it would be fun to have small Mario in addition to the large one. so then switching between Small Mario and Super Mario became a major mechanic in the game. They made Small Mario come first due to the satisfaction of becoming bigger later on. This is also when the game got the title Super Mario Bros., adding Super Mario to the arcade game's name, Mario Bros. It should also be noted that the Super Mushroom was not used as a reference to Alice in Wonderland, but rather simply due to the popular connection between mushrooms and magical places. The reason the Super Mushroom moves was because Miyamoto thought it was more fun to chase it. However, the Super Mushroom also caused a problem towards the end of development. Believe it or not, the Goomba was actually the last object added in the game, a response to the game testers finding the Koopa Troopas too difficult as the first enemies. However, its mushroom-esque design created a bit of a problem. World 1-1 was being adjusted until the very end of development to be a good introduction level for new players, but the developers were afraid of players believing the Super Mushroom to be an obstacle due to the Goomba looking similar. So, they designed the first part of the level to make the Super Mushroom ricochet off the warp pipe to the right, so then it would rush back to the player. If the player tried to jump over it, they would ricochet off the blocks above them and straight into the mushroom. Then, when they tried jumping with the large form, they'd realize they could break blocks like the ones floating above them. Finally, there was the box art drawn by Miyamoto himself. It definitely looks strange compared to the modern Mario art, as it was Yoichi Kotabe, a famous Japanese artist and animator who would polish up the characters' designs after the game's release. He worked for Toei Animation for over a decade before leaving and joining other animation projects, until eventually becoming the main illustrator for Mario, and he was the one who refined the character designs to look more like the ones we have now. After its release in 1985, over 40 million copies of Super Mario Bros. Were sold, especially due to it eventually being bundled with the Nintendo Entertainment System. It's safe to say that the game helped many get back into gaming after the video game crash of 1983 had convinced the public that games were nothing more than a dead fad. Countless games of this era would then try and build upon the side-scrolling action and platforming gameplay that Super Mario Bros. Established. It pioneered the platforming genre, and it changed the way that people viewed games and the way they were made forever. Suddenly, video games were back, and Nintendo established that it was a very powerful force in the gaming industry.